Humans and biodiversity. In order to be able to understand how humans affect biodiversity, you need to understand what biodiversity is. So, biodiversity is the sum of all the different types of organisms on Earth. It is all the living things, the different types of living things that exist on this planet. This is all your insects, all your mammals, amphibians, reptiles, plants, shrubs, trees, flowers, the works. So basically everything that exists on this planet. It's kind of an image to kind of show you biodiversity, and you see a bunch of different types of animals and plants here. That's exactly what biodiversity is, the sum of all of them on this planet. What are natural resources? Natural resources are materials that can be found in nature and can be used for monetary gain or economic gain. So humans use these natural resources in order to improve their society. They use it to make money. They use it to make products that we need to use in order to live, that kind of thing. So some examples of these are oil, coal, natural gas, water, wood, metals, stone, sand, and even plants and animals, because we use plants and animals for food. And oftentimes clothing and things like that as well. So what is the difference between renewable and non-renewable resources? Renewable and non-renewable resources are both categories of natural resources. If you have a renewable resource, that means that it can regenerate or replenish over time. Naturally, they can replenish naturally from natural sources. So if they're alive, they might reproduce to create more, or they might regenerate. And if it's a non-living natural resource, they often get replenished by cycles, so like the water cycle or the nitrogen cycle, things like that. So natural processes that help make more of these types of resources. It's really important to note that renewable does not mean unlimited. Yes, they can regenerate over time, but oftentimes it takes a little bit of time for that to happen. And if we use these resources to the point where they can't produce enough to keep up with it, they will eventually die off, or they will eventually disappear. So keep that in mind. They're renewable, not unlimited. Non-renewable resources are kind of the opposite. These are natural resources that can't be replenished or regenerated by natural processes. Basically, once you use them, they're done. They're gone. The only way to really recreate them would probably be in some kind of lab or man-made facility. So non-renewable resources do not reoccur naturally. Once they're used, they're done. Here are some examples of each type of natural resource. So for renewable resources, you have fresh water, right? That gets renewed by a cycle, the water cycle. There's wind, there's solar or sun, there's soil, and there's plants and animals. A lot of these get cycled and renewed, and some of them reproduce to create more, like your plants and animals. But again, it's important to keep in mind that your renewable resources are not unlimited. Some examples of non-renewable resources are coal, oil, sand, stone, gravel, natural gas, and salt. These are all things that once they get used from their original source, they're done. They're gone, there's no more. And if we use them all up, then we don't have them to use anymore. So it's important to keep that in mind. Humans affect everything around us. That means that we affect natural resources. These are some ways that we have an effect on natural resources. So one of them is farming. We farm and use agriculture for plants and animals, but these practices can often lead to increased soil erosion. Soil is a natural resource, but over time it can be eroded away as you plant one type of crop in an area. It will seep all the nutrients out of there, And as you have animals that are grazing a lot, that can cause your soil to kind of break down and not be usable anymore. And this often will lead to causing the land to become like a desert. It's called desertification, and it's happened in several areas. But you overuse the land and you use it improperly, and it causes it to be infertile, and you can't really grow much there anymore. Then we have deforestation. Deforestation just means the loss of forests. It's back in the day, clear-cutting practices where you just completely chopped out an entire forest was pretty common. Now we have more sustainable practices. But when we clear cut, when we chop down mass amounts of forest, this causes plants, animals, and fungus to lose their habitats, to lose their homes. If they live in the forest and the forest gets cut down, they lose their homes. This can also increase soil erosion. Trees keep soil in place and help with like the nutrient cycling in the soil. So if you get rid of them, you tend to hurt the soil as well. And it also means there are fewer plants and trees to convert CO2 into oxygen. CO2 or carbon dioxide is stuff that we breathe out. Our cars and our industrial machines give that off, and air pollution. It comes from many different sources, and it's not good for us to breathe mass amounts in. Plants naturally take in that CO2 and convert it to oxygen, which is something we can breathe. So if you remove mass amounts of trees, you move mass amounts of sources of oxygen, which can in turn be very dangerous for us. Then we have overfishing and hunting. I'm not saying that fishing and hunting are bad. They really aren't. However, overfishing and hunting means that you take more than what your fair share is, or more than what can feed your family and yourself if it's just you. So you're kind of being greedy. And when this happens, it can cause species to become endangered and eventually extinct. You can hunt and fish species to extinction. So it's important to take only what you can use, and don't take more. If you're a family of 2, you don't need 10 deer to feed for 1 year. And then we have pollution. I'm sure you've heard of this a lot over the years, but pollution is when harmful materials enter the land, water, or air. We use a lot of harmful materials in our everyday life that do get into the land, water, and the air. And this can cause the death of many plant and animal species as it gets into their systems and their food sources and things like that. It can also cause acid rain. Acid rain can burn leaves of plants, and it can kill off plants. It can also change the chemistry of the soils. So as water gets into the soil, as well as standing water like ponds and puddles and things like that, the organisms that use those things like the soil and the standing water then consume that pollution and can get sick and die. And they could also pass it on to their offspring, pass it on to their children. Pollution also lowers the amount of fresh water available on Earth. It's a renewable resource, but it's not unlimited. So if we pollute all of our fresh water, we don't have any fresh water for us to use. So why is biodiversity important? Biodiversity itself is one of Earth's greatest natural resources. You saw that plants and animals are natural resources. Well, biodiversity is just that. It's the sum of all the different types of plants, animals, all the living things on Earth. And the variety of species on Earth has given us food. It's given us different industrial products, and it's given us so many different types of medicines. Can you imagine only having like 2 different species on this Earth? Can you imagine having only having iceberg lettuce and frogs on this Earth, plus humans? We would only be able to eat frogs and iceberg lettuce. We'd only be able to use those things for clothing and medicine, things like that. So biodiversity is extremely important, not only to this whole Earth, but to humans more specifically as well, because we use so many different species for our survival. So what are the current threats to biodiversity? The biggest factor is humans, human activity. Just about everything we do in life can be considered a threat to biodiversity. So as humans develop, we can cause habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation is when ecosystems get split into smaller pieces due to human development. So if you have a forest, right, and humans want to start building homes in that area, they start chopping down trees and leveling the land so they can build houses. Well, you just built a house in the middle of a whole habitat, so now that habitat is broken up into smaller chunks. And the more we develop, the more that habitats get broken up. And as we break up these homes of these plants and animals, it can cause them to disappear over time. Not all species adapt to live around humans. Not every species is a pigeon. Pigeons didn't start, from the beginning of their time living in cities, pooping on statues. They had to adapt to that. They were out in the open, kind of wild area. And now, because cities have popped up in their habitats, they've had to adjust and adapt to basically be dumpster doves, right? They've had to adapt to live around us. Humans also have an extremely high demand for wildlife products. This has happened for so long. When explorers first came to North America. So, not to mention the Native Americans, they used wildlife for everything that they did in life. What happens is humans often hunt animals to extinction in order to use them for foods or other products. An example of this is in Canada, back when the explorers were first exploring North America from Europe, they hunted beavers almost to extinction for their pelts. It's cold in Canada. They need those pelts to stay warm, but they weren't being careful, and they hunted beavers almost to extinction because we needed the wildlife products. So we tend to overhunt to supply the demand of people, which then leaves the species vulnerable and often causes them to die off permanently or become extinct. We come back to pollution. We use humans in many aspects of our life. We use it to clean, we use it to cook, we use it when we travel, so many different aspects of our life. And what happens is these toxins eventually get into ecosystems, and they affect all parts of the food web, especially your higher level consumers. We learned in a food web that as energy flows through an ecosystem, as it flows through a food chain, the energy level goes down over time. However, with pollution, the pollution doesn't get used by the plants and animals, so therefore it just gets passed on to the next one, and all of these toxins accumulate in different species. Then we have invasive species. Humans are super excited about releasing things into the wild and bringing things from where bringing them to places they shouldn't be. So an invasive species is when a plant or animal species is brought to a new place where they're not naturally found, so they're not native to the area. And when this happens, the invasive species often thrive because they have no natural predators. And this causes them to, kind of become beefy and be able to kill off much of the native species populations in the area. We have quite a few invasive species in Maine. We have this vine that grows all over trees and different plants right in Farmington that eventually suffocates them. We have a green crab that absolutely decimated our shellfish population a couple years back, and it's still here and thriving. Periwinkles, which are a type of sea snail kind of thing that you see on the coast, those are all invasive, and now they're just all over the place. You can't step on a rock without stepping on a periwinkle. So we have an insane amount of invasive species that happen. So what can these threats to biodiversity cause? So all of these human activities can cause species to become endangered or eventually extinct. This then eventually leads to a lower biodiversity on Earth. An endangered species is a species whose population size is going down in a way that places it in danger of extinction. An extinction is when a whole species disappears or dies off.